Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. So you think making $100,000 means you're all set, right? 6 figures, that should be a pretty comfortable lifestyle. But it turns out that a lot of people making a $100,000 salary are still living paycheck to paycheck. I came across an article on Yahoo that broke down the ideal budget for someone earning $100,000 a year. And let me tell you, I thought it was pretty eye-opening to see this broken down on a day-to-day basis and see what true spending actually looked like. And they had a really useful chart in this article, but before we get to it, let's talk about that $100,000 income. Because just because you make $100,000 certainly doesn't mean you take home $100,000. We have to first take off taxes, deductions, and all these other things before that money actually gets into your bank account. So what you end up with, your take-home pay, is usually quite a bit less. So while $100,000 a year comes out to about $8,300 a month, that is not what actually hits your bank account. According to this article, what actually hits your bank account is closer to $70,000 or $80,000 a year, depending on your deductions and depending on the state you live in. And that was one of the driving points of the chart in this article, that maybe if you have a $100,000 income, your take-home pay on a monthly basis is going to be closer to something like $6,250. Which means essentially you're living on $75,000 a year, and that has to cover all of your wants, your needs, and everything in between. So let's take a look at this chart. Broadly looking at this budget, 30% is allocated towards housing, 15% each towards food and savings and investments, 10% towards transportation, 8% towards building a liquid cash buffer or an emergency fund, and 5% each towards utilities, healthcare, and miscellaneous, and finally 7% towards entertainment. I think these are all very healthy categories for a budget, but one of my largest takeaways is just how little you get in some of these categories. For instance, having a $100,000 income and then saying housing costs have to be limited to just $1,900 a month, that really shows why so many people earning a 6-figure income are likely still living paycheck to paycheck. One thing this budget, putting it out visually, did for me was highlight the importance of needing a budget, whether that is putting pen to paper, using some Excel spreadsheets or some other software. It doesn't matter how you do it. Having a budget shows you what you can spend in each category. It gives you better control over your money. It's not about limitations, it's about having options. I also like that this budget is setting aside about $500 a month or 8% towards an emergency fund and building that up. But I do see this as a temporary line item because once you have a fully funded emergency fund, you can take this money and allocate it towards other priorities. Transportation is another area that can shrink over time. If you keep your vehicle long after it's paid off, then you really only need to budget for insurance and gas. And some of these categories can have a lot of variability. When we talk about food or groceries, that's going to be very different for, say, a family of 1 than it is a family of 4. Then if we talk about healthcare, the expense is likely going to differ if you're having to buy healthcare on your own or getting it through an employer. And what if you're managing debt like student loans? Well, in that case, you might have to cut back on your wants so you can make room to manage this debt and get it paid off. I'm not trying to nitpick any of the line items listed here. I think the biggest takeaway is that when you actually break down your budget by category, it gives you a real, honest picture of what you can spend. And that's the whole point. Budgeting is about directing your income to the things that matter most to you. My whole approach has always been spend less in the categories that you don't care about, minimize them as much as possible, so you can spend more in the areas that do matter to you. Now let's talk about taxes, because this might be the part of the video where we throw out the previous entire budget we just looked at. But stick with me for a second, because how much you actually end up paying in taxes really is going to determine how much spendable income of your $100,000 income you have to work with. First of all, if you are single with no kids, you're going to face the highest tax burden. It's unfortunate, but it's true. The federal tax deduction for 2024 for an individual is $14,600, and after this, you would pay a little bit under $14,000 in taxes. So instead of taking home $100,000, you'd actually bring home closer to $86,000. Now, if you're married and filing jointly, good news, you qualify for an even larger standard deduction, which further reduces your tax bill, giving you more to take home. In that case, you'd owe closer to $8,000 in federal taxes, giving you a take-home income of about $92,000. And what if you're married with 2 kids? Well, good news, now you get to factor in the child tax credit, $2,000 per child. So instead of paying about $8,000 in federal taxes, now your tax bill is just over $4,000. And that means your net income would be closer to about $96,000. So here's the big takeaway. Even though people love to throw around that $100,000 number, that's not really the number you're working with. But let's also keep in mind that based on that Yahoo article, we're likely not working with that number either. With a $100,000 salary, if you're single, your take-home pay is likely closer to $86,000. If you're married, it's closer to $92,000. And if you're married with 2 kids, it's likely closer to $96,000. And that brings us to the real reason why people have kids. It's for the tax credit. Okay, I'm kidding, but if you do have kids, of course, you want to make sure that you use that tax credit. There is one glaring flaw with all of those numbers as they were presented, and you probably caught it already, but that's that they don't factor in any taxes at the state level. Once we were to factor in state taxes, that might increase your tax bill anywhere from, say, $2,500 to $4,000 on an annual basis, depending on the state you live in. But the thing to point out here is that regardless, whatever your household style is, wherever you live, it's unlikely that if you have a $100,000 income that you're paying $25,000 in taxes. That's just a little bit too high of a tax burden for this income. But it also does show why you still want to have a budget so you know how to best spend your money. So let's run this budget again. We're going to use the exact same percentages from the article, and we're going to assume a married couple with no children. We're also going to factor in $3,000 worth of state-related taxes just to be a bit more accurate. So with this baseline income of $100,000, instead of the net take-home pay as previously listed around $92,000, factoring in these state taxes, it'll bring it down closer to about $89,000. When we run our budget this way, this gives us an additional $14,000 a year to spend, or nearly $1,200 a month. That allows us to boost our spending in every single category. And I have included the emergency fund allocation in this budget, but I do want to point out again that that emergency fund allocation is a line item that only exists for a temporary period of time. Once you have an emergency fund built up, go ahead and take that money and allocate it to any other category that appeals to you. And I'm not saying that this is the perfect budget for a $100,000 income for a couple, because what really is going to matter is what works for your lifestyle. But I don't think we can overstate the importance of actually writing down your expenses and clearly seeing how much you can spend in each category. I also want to point out that I love a percentage-based budget because as your income grows, you're free to spend more on the things that matter to you, whether that is dining out, entertainment, savings, and investments, whatever it is. And one of the best things you can do over time is work to increase your income. And if you have a mortgage, this means that your housing costs are going to be relatively fixed. And if you own your car and you get it paid off and you keep driving that for as long as possible, this is going to lower your transportation costs over time. So if your income increases and your essential expenses are on the lower end relative to your income, this will give you more freedom to spend in other areas of your life. Now let's say that our 2-person household got an increase of pay, about 5%. At this time, they deliberately keep their housing expenses and transportation expenses the same. They don't increase them just because their income increased. Also, because they've already been taking the time to build up an emergency fund, it is fully funded and they can stop the contributions to that, and it frees up the money to be used elsewhere. Well, now they're working with a monthly income of about $7,800 after taxes. And this pay increase after housing and transportation, since they stay the same, gets to go really to increasing any and all of the other remaining categories. So it might look something like this. And it's not that each of these categories have to increase. You can increase just entertainment or just dining out or just investments. It's really however you want to allocate the increase. And beyond just how the numbers are presented here, there are absolutely other ways to stretch your budget and make your money go further. For instance, if you're a single income earner with this level of income, maybe you decide to get a roommate. Immediately, this is going to cut your housing expenses in half, it's going to cut your utility bills in half, and this is going to give you way more breathing room with your budget. Knowing exactly how you can spend your income is a very powerful starting point. From there, I think it's really important to try to keep your fixed expenses as low as possible and then work on growing your income, and this is going to give you a great sense of freedom in spending power. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with lifestyle inflation as long as you're intentional about it. And if you're going to spend more as you earn more, make sure it's on the things that matter most to you. And don't forget to keep increasing your contributions to investments. You may not be able to have everything you want in life, but you likely can have the things that matter most to you. And at the end of the day, a budget is about making your money work for you, not the other way around. So if you look at your budget, what are your top 3 categories that are your most important to fund? Leave your thoughts in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. Or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Just poked my camera. Housing, 50%. I think I just said 50. 15. I'll try to be careful with my numbers. What do I do? What? I don't need... What do I do? Many people are probably have a budget. Whether you just this picture of what you can spend. The child tax, that was almost said child care tax credit. Maybe you decide to get a roommate. Well, immediately that's gonna cut your head off. That's what it's gonna do. Or say a family of 4. What did I want to talk about after food? Healthcare. Food, healthcare, and there's 3 that I want to talk about. Food, healthcare, food, healthcare. Then what? Debt. That's it. Okay.